Welcome to this special edition of our CCXConsult Network knowledge sharing webinars. And today we have one of our members, Hilario Fiandeiro, and he's going to talk to us about the 5 hidden sources of waste in contact centers. I find this a fascinating topic because having audited probably several hundred call centers in my time, we see huge amounts of waste and accelerating costs in contact centers, which are totally unnecessary. So, Hilario, over to you, and will you take us through your workshop? I'm looking forward to learning more from you. So I'll drop out my video now, and it's over to you.
Thanks, Rod. Thank you for the introduction.
You muted there, Hilario. You muted. Hilario, you muted.
Is it unmuted now?
Okay, it's unmuted now. Okay.
All right. So I'm going to let me just stop sharing, and I'm going to try and reshare again. So there we go. All right. So we can see my screen, eh?
Yes. Okay. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for making time to, out of your busy schedules. And I just want to warmly welcome you to our session today. As Rod mentioned, we're going to be talking about the 5 hidden sources of waste, which is killing your contact center productivity. I know it's a bit of a dramatic intro, but it's it is something that it's not always like in your face, but it does apply. And I'm going to go through specific examples of where this could be happening in your contact center right this moment. But before I start off, I'd like to mention that this webinar series, it's a CCX Insight series, is brought to you by CCXConsult network, of which I'm a part of. So essentially, it's a network of independent consultants who are very experienced and have a broad range of skills and competencies. And I think one of the reasons why we've kind of banded together as a network of independent consultants is that for certain projects, we can sort of work together as a team, and we can compete with some of the bigger consulting agencies, but without necessarily costing an arm and a leg. So this is kind of the network that I belong to. And just to keep the momentum going, next week we are going to have my esteemed colleague Roz Broom, who's doing a talk on strategic insight into the next 5 years. Specifically for in the BPO space. So whilst today's session is quite grounded in operations and fundamentals, I think next week we're going to zoom out a little bit and kind of get into a more strategic sphere of our industry. So if you haven't registered for that, just please keep that in mind for next week this time. I'd also like to mention that my organization called Contact Center Smart, and we've been on a mission to improve contact centers performance for good since 2010. And essentially, I think one of the things that we want to do is give organizations and call center managers and peace of mind that their contact center is running at the best that it can possibly be running at that time. And so the consultancy is really dedicated to improving contact center performance. And as our tagline says, we want to transform contact centers from run-of-the-mill to talk of the town, because I think there's a lot of run-of-the-mill type contact centers, and we want to try and elevate that level a little bit up. So, what's our mission today? We're going to zoom right out to me and say, like, what is our important mission today? It's we are here to identify inefficiencies hiding in plain sight. And we're going to suggest solutions that don't sort of cost the proverbial arm and leg. So we're going to go through them in a way that I think is very practical. And my focus around here in making sure that you guys get the most value out of this hour is to leave you with tangible takeaways that you can implement quite readily in your environment. So if I to look at the soundtrack to which a lot of contact center managers operate, it would be a song called Under Pressure, so it'll be this track here, Under Pressure by David Bowie and Queen. And how are contact center managers under pressure? And I'm just going to let the slide run. So on every given day, these are the kind of trade-offs and pressures that contact center managers face. All right, so it just gives you an idea of the kind of trade-offs that we as contact center managers and executives are facing each day. A lot of it has to do with trying to find an optimal balance. Say, for example, handling more customers with less cost. We want to do service faster, but with better quality. So all of these kind of trade-offs are being managed on a daily basis in our contact centers. So the question is, where do we start? Where do we start to unravel all of this? I would say it might not be the starting place for a lot of people, but we got to understand our nuts and bolts. Like, what do we, and the question to me that's quite important is, at the moment, what's it costing to serve our customers? What is the cost of us to serve customers? And it might be an odd place to start, but I think it just gives us an idea of where we're at in terms of some of the improvements that we could potentially make, and whether those improvements are actually worth it. And I think a lot of contact centers are operating without an in-depth knowledge and an intimate knowledge of what things are actually costing them to serve customers. And so to get into that a little bit, obviously we can get like deep into the weeds in terms of like understanding our costs, but to me a starting point is understanding what is the cost per agent seat per month. And this is no different to what I think a lot of people would have seen already. So we've got certain cost factors, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to be running with an example over here. And then I'll show you towards the end, like how you can customize this for your area. But typically, cost factors would include, salary plus benefits, and these are some of the numbers that I've put together. This obviously will differ, contact center to contact center. But let's just have a look at, this kind of distribution of costs would be relatively typical of a number of contact centers. So we've got an agent salary and we've got their benefits. So in that salary number, yes, we've got the actual salary, but we've also got to include things like your upfront investment, for example, in training and in induction and getting people ready to be productive agents on their first day. And obviously that cost will differ depending on how long agents are retained within the business. So, I mean, if you've got an agent and the average retention is like, say, 3 or 4 months and then they leave, that initial investment is quite painful, and that becomes quite high. So, all of these numbers would be relevant to a particular organization. And you'll see the next lines, management of support costs. Now, if we were able to hire agents and have them perform an optimal performance and organize themselves so that they can be there when needed to take calls, then we would rely less on management and support costs. But we know that the reality is that we need supporting costs, like we need a workforce manager or a quality assurance specialist. We need team leaders, we need managers. And the costs of those need to be incorporated into our structure. And likewise with telephony and technology, those costs also need to be introduced, and the seat infrastructure costs in terms of your seats and your PCs and so on and so forth. So the one point that I want to make here is that we are what I'm mainly focused here is not so much, like lowering these costs as a starting point. Sure, we can lower, like the cost or the salaries we pay agents. We can lower, management and support costs. We can maybe hire less or slightly less sophisticated technology. We could rent space that's maybe slightly inferior to what we've got at the moment. All of those costs, yes, will bring down your sort of cost per agent seat in the short term. But what we worried about in this session, or I think what we worried about in our daily lives, is do we have a structure that is sustainable for the long run? And that's kind of been my focus. So now that we've got a cost per agent seat, which we've kind of looked at, I'm going to use an example. In our little call center, we've got 20 agents. We answer on average, say, 30,000 calls per average. And this data is not rocket science. So we get this typically quite easily. But it's about just structuring this together. So we know that our total cost then per month, we can get to a cost per call answered, a cost per call minute, and a cost per second. So I think once we've got this in place, we can start understanding, what are the levers that we need to move, and is it worth moving that lever? So that's why I say it's quite important to start with this structure. So in our journey, we're going to go through 5 what I call hidden costs or wastes within our organization, and some of them you might think again it's not typically things that are like unknown, but it is very important to understand what's the hidden part about it. So to start off with, I'm going to talk about reducing wasteful AHT and optimizing fruitful AHT. Now, AHT is average handle time. And a lot of people kind of dismiss AHTs as something not even worth looking at. And it's the traditional metric that gets a lot of flack. But to me, the important, AHT is a very important indicator of how effective and efficient your contact center is running at. So it's important to not just look at AHT as a generic number, but to make sure that we understand what actually goes into AHT. So one way to look at this is to kind of dissect it and say, okay, let's have a look at your AHT. Typically, and the frame of mind that I've got for this discussion and this presentation is an inbound, say, customer service center dealing with your traditional phone calls, and then we that's kind of my starting point. So, in any sort of environment, we would have kind of a welcome, and typically customers will be routed in an IVR sort of system. Then they might be waiting on the line, listening to music, and there's announcements. And then typically the phone then gets routed to an agent, and there's a little bit of ring time. The agent picks up, has a discussion with the customer, Sometimes then customers need to be put on hold. And then typically after the call is done, the wrap up and the admin work is done. So if you look at this aspect over here, it's really giving us a rich view on various areas in which we can start optimizing, so that we're making those hidden costs more seen. So I'll start here, for example, on the wait in the queue. For example, there's two things happening. Either your customers are waiting or your agents are waiting in this sort of an idle zone. And to kind of minimize that wait time, what we need to do, we need to make sure that our forecasting, what we forecast is going to come in, actually is going to come in. So our forecasting accuracy is high, and we have the right amount of people at the right time. So we've also linked it up with our scheduling, making sure that we've got the right amount of people at the right time, so that our wait time, either for the customer or the agent, is kind of minimized. And I think that's already a starting point. The next tangible thing that we can look at is, and I normally start this as this is typically low-hanging fruit in organizations that haven't looked at this, is to look at your ring time. This should be trending towards like close to zero. And so not normally what I recommend is having a situation where the call automatically goes into answer. There is no ring time. Now, the main bulk of our AHT is actually talking with agents, and this part of the discussion, and also like the part where agents will get put on hold, and even the after call work time, we often look at AHT as just a number. But really what we should be looking at is getting a microscope at understanding, looking into these conversations and seeing, okay, what part of that conversation is actually fruitful and worth something, or what part of it is wasteful. And I think we need to kind of lay in a different level. And so I think that would be our discussion. So in terms of like what to look for in terms of cutting waste, these things are happening right now. So there's agents needing to toggle between 5 or so different systems to get to an answer. Agents possibly asking irrelevant questions, or questions that might have made sense a few years ago, but we're still asking questions. And maybe solving the wrong problems. And so those are the kind of things that we need to look to minimize. But what I suggest, or what I often say is, don't just look to minimize that AHT. I think we can kind of replace it with something else. We can celebrate people's like birthdays, anniversaries, or whatever events is on a particular day. We can spend quite a bit of time or focus trying to resolve potential future calls that the customer might have in the future. But obviously, if an agent is kind of being limited, or if their HT is being monitored like a hawk, these things are not going to happen. So. But it gives us, so these kind of value-adding aspects to your conversation time is so useful. Like, for example, cleaning data, or potentially maybe even upselling something, especially on the end of a really good service call. I think there's a good opportunity to maybe sell something upwards. So that is. So for each thing that we identify, I think that the key insight here for me with regards to HT is that HT is not a single metric. We look at it as a single number, but not all of AHT is equal. So what I'm suggesting is we've got to control H your HTs. In other words, control H on Excel, whatever, is find and replace. So find the wasteful HT and really be meaningful about that, and then replace it with more fruitful HT. And then one that I often suggest, and I get quite a bit of pushback, is I'm suggesting we need to stop asking how may I help you. So, typically on an intro to a call, an agent would say, welcome to Able Bank. You're speaking to Able. How may I help you? And then the customer would say, yes, I wonder if you could. And sorry, who am I speaking to again? And then the agent repeats themselves, and an intro that maybe could be shortened, then takes a little bit longer. So what I'm suggesting is that the agent would say, welcome to Able Bank. You're speaking to Able. And so the last thing that the customer remembers is the agent's name. And the customer is much more likely to say, great, Able, you're speaking to Kane, and this is my query. Kind of automatically personalizes that call from the get-go, and there's less sort of to and fro. And my point around this is really that you may not agree with me in terms of removing this particular question, but a question like this may not even appear as irrelevant, but could be the subject of scrutiny if you look through it quite carefully. So I'm just saying, right now in your conversations, there might be things that we're asking that we don't think is irrelevant, but we could look at changing that up. So that is that's the first one. Now, the second one is around minimizing robotic conversations. Now, obviously, the discussion on automation and AI has exploded in the last couple of years. But even with all that hype, I think there's still a lot of conversations where human agents are having robotic type of conversations. So what do I mean here? So for every conversation that we've got, there's part of it that's kind of robotic, and there's part of it that's really quite human. So the automate indicators are things like, is it a routine sort of like conversation? In other words, do we have a question and an answer, and that answer is only one possible answer? Is it predictable? What the next question might be? Could we script this? Is it rule based, repetitive? And these are the kind of, with every conversation we've got this happening. And obviously, in a contact center environment, we've got an existing self-serve capability where customers are serving themselves via an app or via the web. And a lot of those queries have been usurped based on these automate indicators. Or now more recently, we've got agentic AI kind of taking care of these automate indicators. And so, but right now, even to the extent that we've done that, there are still conversations that we have a lot of this automate stuff in it. And then on the other side, we've got our human indicators where we're either negotiating with clients, we're trying to persuade or influence, we may be brainstorming with the customer, what are the new ways of doing things so that the process is better. We often may be teaching or coaching our clients on how to use particular things, and we're managing emotions. Now, obviously, a few years ago, I would have never dreamt that an AI could help in this sphere too. But, lo and behold, we have got Agent Assist AI that helps in actually negotiating, persuading, influence. And so I think one of the key things coming out of any AI implementations is around making sure that we are using AI on use cases that make sense. So I think the precursor to that is to understand at the moment is to go through all your conversations and understand, okay, what part of that conversation could be automated, and then that gives you a clue as to what could potentially be self-served or added to the self-serve functionality. So I think that's quite key. So talking about self-serve, if I had to ask you, what are customers' preference? Do they prefer using self-service, or do they prefer actually calling us? And okay, this research was done probably a little bit more than 10 years ago now. It's amazing how time is rocketing on. But this is what they found. So, for in our younger age groups, there was a slight preference for self-serve over the phone, and even for our older cohorts, and remembering that this is 10 years ago, so all of these people have now moved on, 10 years on, and so we would kind of say that on the whole, our customers value self-serve that actually works properly. So I think a lot of, if I ask customer execs, what do customers prefer, they might still think that they actually prefer having a conversation, but the data certainly on this survey, indicates that if self-serve is working properly, then that's the way to go. Look, I mean, there might be more recent surveys, and I'm happy to be, if you want to point me into a proper quality peer-reviewed survey that goes against this, then I'm happy to look at it. But based on the information and the data that we've got, the insight here is that I think most customers still prefer self-serve that works properly. So what's the tangible takeaways from this? Is that I think we've got to identify interactions, both inbound and outbound, that could easily be self-serve. So it almost overlaps on the first point, where we're saying, having a look at what the nature of that actual conversation with customers, and dissecting it in terms of what is routine and automated versus what is where a real human is actually required. And I think if we do that both on the in and outbound, we could start picking up clues as to what aspects of our existing conversations could be even automated further. We know that this is an iterative process. You've already done this, but I think it's just, it keeps on. We need to keep iterating this. And then for your existing self-serve channels, which you've already created, we've got to interrogate very closely as to where and why customers are opting out of that self-serve channels. Could it be that the wording is kind of got internal jargon and it's not being understood, or whatever the reason is. Typically right now at the moment, you find certain branches in your self-serve menu are kind of weak spots where customers are opting out more often than not. Those are the kind of things that we would need to look at. So that's another on, I know your to-do plates are already kind of brimming and full, but at the end of each of these waste indicators, I'm going to give you, things that you can tangibly do in your environment. The next is repeat contacts, and I do think we measure repeat contacts, but again, I think the level of granularity into which we go into this could improve. So, for example, again, lending on from that similar reach, and I like this research because they spoke to a lot of customers, like almost 100,000 customers, and they looked at certain factors that would generate more loyalty and certain factors that kind of make customers more disloyal to an organization. And so, and with respect to a typical call center conversation. So on the positive side, if an agent is able to teach customers something new, so if we kind of look for opportunities where the customer is struggling with an aspect of our product that they don't understand or they know how to use, and then the agent's able to teach that customer something new, they're more likely to tell their friends, gee, this organization is amazing. I spoke to this agent and they let me know how the product actually works. So that's got a boost, and I think we got to spend time on doing that. And also, if we can improve our first call resolution, That's been, I think, widely known for a while, that that's going to improve loyalty. But now let's look at the opposite side of the scale, the negative side. On the negative side is if a customer has to make more than one contact to resolve the same issue. In other words, the effort in getting resolution is high, and high because it's more than one contact to resolve. That's going to have quite a deleterious impact on your customer loyalty. It's going to put that down quite a bit. If they're speaking to agents that where they feel like they're just a number, and they're getting generic service, not service that's tailored to them specifically, that's also going to impact loyalty on the negative side. Where they have to repeat information, so where either maybe agents not listening, or they've had to be transferred, and then they've got to repeat the same information. That again has got a negative effect. And then talking about transfers, if they've been transferred from pillar to post, that's got a negative effect there. So the reason why I'm bringing this slide up is that not only is repeat calls more costly, so because they're just more calls to handle, if you look back over here, it's also having the biggest negative impact on our customer loyalty. So we want to try and avoid the customer from needing to repeat. So this has got kind of a double, if you do the analysis over here, there's kind of a cost benefit and a customer loyalty slash improved word of mouth, improved sales kind of benefit down the line. So I think this is quite an important one to isolate specifically. So we then, what I strongly suggest is have a kind of filter all your repeat calls and understand really what's causing them, what's driving them. And typically, some of the drivers of repeat calls would be things like where promises are not kept. The customer says, no, you should have this ready in 2 days, and 2 days it doesn't happen. Or even worse, and something that I see happen a lot, where promises are not even made. So the agent will say, look, to the customer, look, I can't promise you anything. There's no sort of turnaround time on this particular, but please do call in 1 or 2 days time. So we literally inviting a repeat call, and I think that's quite problematic. So we need to relook at that. Sure, sometimes customers phone in again because the answer that they got from the previous agent was not what they wanted to hear, and this is why I kind of put it in quotation marks. They're looking for better answers, for answers that give them a more favorable output. So I think sometimes customers do that, and in order to prevent this, our agents have got to be very assertive in their existing interactions and to let customers know that what they've said is the actual answer. So if your agents aren't able to be assertive on the calls, this is what's going to happen. Obviously, there's errors that can be made in terms of wrong information given or captured, which means that people may be fulfilling the client's request down the line, have got the wrong information, and the customer has to pull back. But certainly, I think we've got to analyze repeat calls a lot more closely in order to try and minimize that. So just to recap, repeat call contacts, they cost more and they wreck loyalty. So identify the number and the repeat contacts, of why customers are needing to repeat. We've discussed that. And then secondly, repeat calls and first contact resolution are very closely linked. So I would find out, sort of what percentage of my contacts are not resolved on first contact and why. Often things are not resolved in first contact because the agent is not empowered to make a decision at that point in time, has to refer it to a department down the line. And every time that happens, there's more potential for repeat contacts. And we're going to look through the discussions and say, okay, is there a way that the agent can maybe resolve that on that first contact? And I think we would need to seriously look at that as something to look at. So The fourth item that I want to mention is reduce preventable calls. Now, repeat call is it's obviously one type of preventable call, but then we could actually expand our net a lot further and say, let's look at all calls and say, look, how could we have prevented the customer from needing to call us in the first place? Now, I think humans and people in nature, we kind of like heroic reaction to stuff, So movies like Batman versus Superman would not exist if there was, if like these two characters tried to avoid a conflict. It just, but I think we kind of almost addicted to heroic reaction. If we able to resolve a customer query and go the extra mile and do the +1, it kind of gives us a bit of a dopamine little hit to say, look, we've actually done great stuff for the customer. Customer's happy. They're sending positive word of mouth. But I think this is overemphasized, and what's underemphasized is the fact that sometimes the best service is still no service. Make sure that the customer does not need to even contact us in the first place. Obviously, easier said than done. But my sort of leaning or my tendency is to be more mindful of proacting more and maybe reacting less. So what would typically be preventable? These would be like your predictable events. So like every year you're going to have to issue, for example, tax certificates. That's kind of a yearly thing, and we can get to the customer before they get to us. We can prevent unnecessary interactions by making sure our customer communications are super clear, especially when it comes to communication. We must write so clearly that it's not misunderstood. You can't just let it be understood. It must not be misunderstood. So that's quite a high hurdle to cross for sort of written communication specifically. And sometimes there might not be a clear call to action in what we want customers to do. For example, do they want to does the customer need to contact us, via what channel, and so on and so forth, and so that might cause confusion. So the insight here with regards to reducing preventable calls is that the best service is still no service, and the tangible kind of takeaways is having a look now at pretty much your whole inbound, or the reason for customers needing to contact or making a contact, whether it's a call or whether it's physically, like an email or some form that they have to fill online. How could that have been prevented? And then sort of getting in a little bit more into the kind of a user experience scenario, so that when they do fill in a form, how much of that form could be pre-populated so that the customer, it's as easy as possible. So it kind of extends to a kind of a user experience mindset. And what I'm also suggesting here is on each call, our focus has been around first call resolution, but I think we need to move beyond that into kind of a next issue avoidance. So if an agent can see that a customer has asked about a type of query, but is likely to phone about another type of query, for example, medical aid claims that have not been paid, the customer will likely, want to query that down the line. Address those issues head on. And again, I come back to if your AHTs are tightly controlled, this type of next issue avoidance is not going to happen. So anyway, it's got to work in a system or in a culture, in an organization that values this. And in order to reduce preventable calls, we might have to take a kind of a cost hit initially, but down the line, we're going to be avoiding certain preventable calls. And then the final one, before I sort of show you a couple of actual tangible tools and the like, is in this one is, I think, probably most hidden, although it doesn't look like it, is to revisit your contact center structure. So in any contact center environment, we have got sort of a leaning towards specialized agent groups on the one hand, and more sort of pooled or generalized agent groups on the other hand. So, for example, an organization might have all their clients serviced by one group of sales consultants that service all the clients, and the clients might have different needs, but they service all of them. And likewise for the service side of it. In another sort of organization, they might have a specialization focus. So where they say, okay, we're going to segment our customer base into client A, B, and C. And within that, we want to make sure that we've got the best agents that are specialized to handle client A sales and service calls. And therefore, we set up agent groups to handle all of this situation. So that's kind of like our, and there's no right and wrong answer. And sometimes we fluctuate to more sort of specialized and then pooled and so on and so forth. But I think over here it's instructive to look at some of the numbers that go into this. And I'll give you an example. So in terms of specialization in action, let's just say we've got a specialized kind of contact center environment. We've got sales A and service A, servicing a type of customers, likewise with B and C. We've got calls per hour, coming in at 100. Our HT is 210. We've got a service level that we want to achieve of 80% calls answered within 20 seconds. And if you pop that into your Erlang C calculator, it says that we need 9 people to service that kind of incoming demand. And let's just, for simplicity's sake, that all our other contact center groups are exactly the same. So we have, the same calls, same HT, same service level. And obviously, that means we've got 9 agents. So in order to handle all this incoming demand, we've got 6 times 4, so 54 agents. 6 times 9, so we've got 54 agents that we need to service these clients. So let's see if we decide, okay, let's pull some of this stuff together. Let's just say we are going to just have one group of sales and one group of service servicing all our client base. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to just keep it the same. So whereas before we had 3 groups of sales contact center groups and 3 groups of service, now there's 300 calls in the one, and then it means we need 22 agents, and then for sales and service, 22 agents. So now what's happening here is that we only now require 44 agents. Now remember that in our specialized scenario, we needed 54. So now we've saved 10 agents. Just by restructuring the way we've done it. We could even go one level further, and like we can say super pooling in action. So our agents are super multi-skilled, and they can do sales and they can do service, and therefore they can handle all 600 calls within the same HT, within the same service level. We then need 40 agents, so that's even a bigger saving of slightly 4 agents. So you can see, like, for example, there's certainly a cost-effective imperative to move towards a more pooled environment. But then you'd say, it's obviously a no-brainer. But we know that contact centers are more complex than that. So it's not just a no-brainer that we've got to be pooling everything. Sometimes it makes sense to specialize. So I'll just leave you with a couple of factors that we would look at to analyze, which way we're going to go. In terms of agent occupancy, in a pooled environment, those agents are going to be more occupied, just to, like, your basic economies of scale, they're going to be more occupied. And so I think pooling will win there. In terms of planning and making sure we've got the right amount of people at the right time, if you're in one big pool and that kind of planning complexity is lowered. You've only got a forecast for that one group. You've got to make sure we got people for that one group, and there's kind of more leeway for absenteeism. And so again, I think pooling wins that battle hands down. In terms of calls being transferred and all over the place, there's a much higher thing of that happening in your specialized environment, where customers are maybe dialing in or selecting the wrong IVR choice, and they then have to be retransferred. And so again, I think pooling wins there. In terms of your average handle time, and also linked to quality, but let's just have a look at average handle time. Certainly, I think the specialized one is going to be lower, all things being equal, and therefore that's why we do specialized. The amount of training time that you need agents to get onto the phone to become productive is a lot shorter in your specialized, because they've got to learn a lot less. And so I think specialization wins there. Quality is debatable, but certainly I think we specialize because we want to deliver customers a higher quality, more effective customer experience. And as we've seen through the numbers, cost effectiveness, pooling wins hands down there. So my thing is to say that there's no clear answer on this, but what I do sort of the insight that I want to leave is that I think a lot of agent groups are splitting because they can and not because they should. So I see this quite a bit, where an agent group could possibly be pooled with another one, but they split because they can and not because they should. And so I'd look to identify agent groups where you can be cross-trained, where the systems can be kind of cross-pollinated, and look to put things into a single group. There might be opportunities in that. And another thing is, don't let what I call twaddy. And what is that? That's the way we've always done it. So when it comes to contact center structure, we think it's kind of more set in stone. So I'm saying, don't let that's the way we've always done it get in the way of a powerful pooling principle. So I'll leave you with that. So in terms of tools and resources that I'll leave you with, and before we go to a quick Q&A. So in terms of tools and resources, I've spoken about this inbound call center and with these kind of numbers. But if on this presentation, we can click through to the cost analyzer, which actually takes you to the spreadsheet, which I can show you after the presentation if you've got time. But basically, this is an input where you can input your numbers to make sure it makes sense for you. I've discussed some of these cost-saving elements in our discussion today. It hasn't been the full set, but certainly, if we can understand, what is our cost per call minute, we can then understand how much do we actually save by, say, for example, shaving 3 seconds of ring time, shaving 20 seconds of wasteful HT. And then we can start using that information to say, how much does that allow us to invest in new technology or new processes to be able to do this? And is it worth it? Because now we start having a conversation around rands and cents as opposed to service level and AHT. And you know that our financial guys are not interested in your service level or AHT. They are interested in rands and cents. Does this make a financial sense? So this is why I think it's so important to understand, what our cost is, because it allows us to kind of have instructive discussions with our finance people and our higher up executives. I've gone through certain actions and things that we can do, but I invite you to take an order, what I call the optimization order. Is really just a checklist of what are some of the behaviors that leading contact centers are doing that you would want to do, and then you do the order to kind of have a checklist of what are the things that you want to tackle as you go forward. And then you can go on to my Contact Center Smart website and download the book, How to Do More with Less in Your Contact Center. which has got links to the spreadsheet and the audit, plus a couple of other things. But it kind of ties all of the stuff together in a way that I think makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of my thing for the moment. I'm going to stop sharing, and then we can take questions around this if there are any, and we can have a discussion on this.
That was great, Hilario. Thank you so much for that. There's so many gems embedded in that whole presentation of yours, and took us through the book that you'd written about this topic.
Yeah, so the book really just kind of what I've shared today is largely is a summary of the book to a degree, and because I know a lot of people, time is precious, and we don't maybe have time to read everything, but it kind of like it explores all of these kind of hidden wastes plus a couple of extra, and the takeaways is that by doing small kind of marginal gains throughout your contact center, you're going to be kind of like making quite a big impact, and then that impact are goods or changes for good, so they don't just last for like 1 month. If you change something, those returns are going to be keep on returning, and I try to make that point in the book as well. So it just basically goes into this in a lot more detail. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. There will be a recording of this session available. We'll put it up on the YouTube channel and send it out to everybody who's registered. Any last words from your side, Hilario? No, I'm going to ask you one more question. A lot of contact centers that I've engaged with have absolutely no idea of their operating costs. And now I find that very, very sad. So I know you're looking at your presentation where you're identifying certain baseline costs. Is there a methodology that you use or a service that you can provide to assist contact centers to get down to that cost per call minute or cost per interaction minute, etc.?
Yes, certainly, right. I mean, I think so. So what I shared in that one slide around, like the various cost buckets, I mean, that's kind of just really a high level thing. And to get to the actual numbers requires quite a lot of nuance and so that's really the high level. Underneath all of those are, if you kind of drill down into each of those factors, there's a lot more sort of cost items. There's like like spans of control. There's there's different types of technology. Is it kind of on-premise cloud? How's that? What's that scenario look like? How does it change with volume? So there's we can really get quickly into the weeds with this kind of stuff. But I just gave you an overview. But certainly, I think in order to improve your accuracy and to really understand like your cost per contact and to have credibility in front of your finance people, you need to know those numbers quite well. So yeah, that's what I would look to help clients do.
Totally agree with you on that one. So, Hilario, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your information, and the free downloads. I'm sure lots of people are going to look for copies of your book. And we look forward to our next CCXConsult Network presentation, which will be this time next week with our colleague Ross Broom. So thank you everybody for attending, and Hilario for your time and your professionalism. Thank you. Goodbye.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Goodbye.